Karavahe Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahana Punatu Sahaviram Karavahe Tejasvinavahitamastu Mavivishavahe Tejasvinavahitamastu Mavivishavahe Mavivishavahe Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahana Punatu Saha Vira Karavahe Tejasvinavahitamastu Mavivishavahe Tejasvinavahitamastu Mavivishavahe Mavivishavahe Lord, protect us, bring us together. Lord, unite us for the good of all. Lord, protect us, bring us together. Lord, unite us for the good of all.
Wow.
Beautiful.
That was absolutely beautiful. Before we actually go to our video, I was hoping we could take a moment out to acknowledge some of the partners in our coalition who are facing very challenging moments in their lives right now. Gene Ferrara, the young man who did the interview when we interviewed Dr. Ryan. Doctor, am I saying your name correctly? Am I pronouncing your name correctly?
It's close enough. Usually we say Rin.
Oh, as you prefer, sir.
Fine.
Dr. Rin. We interviewed Dr. Rin earlier, about 6 weeks ago, and Gene was with me, but he's not here tonight because his mother had a very serious accident yesterday.
Wow.
And there's another person who more than likely would have been here tonight, and that is Pardeep Kalika. Am I saying his name right? Sherry.
Kalika.
He, as you know, is a member of the Sikh community, and he is a leading figure here in the city of Milwaukee, in this community. And he's, to me, one of the finest examples of Christian brotherhood, even though he's not a Christian. His family was attacked cruelly 9 years ago, and he became friends with the leader of the gang that attacked his family and actually murdered some of his family members. And he had the character and love and forgiveness to forgive the person that brought so much harm to his family and friends and close relatives. So we admire Pardeep so very much. And unfortunately, as you know from the news, there's been another attack within the last week on the Sikh community. So we want to send up prayerful thoughts for those who would be with us, whose life has prevented them from being with us tonight. And we want them to be in our thoughts and in the warmness of our hearts, and to be comforted by the love that we send to their families, to them in this difficult hour. So I'm so happy. Everyone in this room is someone that I love and admire. And I'm so happy to be here and to have this opportunity to share with you. And without a whole lot of ado, why don't we go on and see if we can find our video. And then there'll be a brief discussion, very brief, after we get done. Ooh, I'm sorry, I didn't do that right. We found out what was wrong. Okay, now it should work. Now, if you can't hear me, you all have my cell number or you have my home number. You can call me, just let me know. You should be able to hear this. About 10 seconds, the sound will come on.
You got your restraint? Hobble? Jesus Christ. Thank you. Not moving.
Mama.
Yeah,
Mama. Mama.
one of the front pouches
Mama.
on my right side bag.
Mama.
EMS go to.
You're the rest guy.
All right. Oh my God.
Now you go to jail.
I can't believe this. I can't believe this, man. Mama, I love you. Reese, I love you.
You got hobble?
My kids, I love them. I'm dead.
Mine's in my side. It's listed. It's labeled. It says hobble. It's on the
I
top.
can't breathe for this, man. It's cold-blooded, man.
You're doing a lot of
Mama, I love you. I can't do nothing.
Yeah, EMS is on their way.
My face is gone.
You guys can get out of the way.
Don't touch me.
Need this?
Let's go to 40.
You want one of us to ride with?
Yeah. Stay good.
Ride with?
Yeah, stay good.
I don't have my phone, so I'll be Baker.
That's good. Belt it down.
What's that?
Help get belted down.
Yep. Where are we going?
We're just going to be down the street.
Okay.
Welcome to Kenosha, Wisconsin.
The National Guard now on its way to Kenosha, Wisconsin.
Jacob Blake's family calling for prayers and an end to the unrest tonight.
An ensemble inextinguishable. Percussion. Pyro. Inferno. It's the strange American refrain. Jacob Blake was paralyzed. Two sides mobilized. mom said it's no way to rationalize.
It doesn't reflect my son or my family.
Another town burnt to the ground.
We have a community today that is literally on fire.
American foes. A season of echoes. Where next?
And all y'all who are
Welcome to Kenosha, Wisconsin.
Welcome to the Living Experiment in Nonviolence conversation this evening. So we're going to begin. Let me begin by saying welcome, good evening, shalom, and hotep. And thank you, Brother Dayvin Hollman, for joining us here. We're very excited to be able to share this time with you. We're very much looking forward to doing this chat and learning more about your very important work. So why don't we go back to the beginning? Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you were born, where you grew up, and we'll get to know you a little better. We'll start from there.
My name is Dayvin Hollman. I was born in Chicago, grew up in Racine, and lived in Kenosha for about 15 years. And somewhere around Labor Day of 2018, I moved to Milwaukee. I am the music director and founder of the Black String Triage Ensemble, which is a group of Black and Latinx string players, violin, viola, cello, upright bass, that go out and play in the immediate aftermath of tragic events. We have chosen to prioritize shootings, police brutality, occurrences, and play it to car accidents.
Well, we learned that in the introductory video. And by the way, thank you for all the materials that you supplied to help us set up the edit for this program. I was very gracious of you and appreciate it very much. But you had a previous life as a legislator. I think that has a lot to do with where we are now. You might want to tell us about that.
So in 2008, at the age of 23, I was elected to public office in Kenosha as a county official, as a county board supervisor, a position I held for 10 years until 2018, when I decided to basically resign from that role. There was a lot of things that happened in Kenosha that I think were breadcrumbs into forming the Black String Triage Ensemble. Seeing a street fight break out in my district because folks had hot tempers and really didn't have the emotional and mental space to process what was happening in real time in a healthy way, just led to folks fighting. Was able to help cool tempers, but the fact that folks operate in that fashion in the hood when stuff is tense is a concern. Kenosha had something called Keyed Up Kenosha, where they had pianos in downtown Kenosha where anybody could come and play them. And I just remember walking through, I said, they don't need this here. This is downtown. This is the party district. This is where Cheesapalooza is. My district is next door. My district's the hood. There's nothing like this where there's just music for people walking around through the inner city, and they need it.
To be human, to be like human beings. Well, I'm sure when you got to Milwaukee, you found that the community wasn't treated much differently here, but there were perhaps opportunities from Milwaukee being a larger area and room to stretch out your skills, which could have possibly played a role in things turning out the way they did.
Hi, my name is Dayvin Hollman and I need your help. Yesterday, a man walked up to me in a black suit with a nice haircut and offered me money. The problem is, I know that what he and his friends want is not in the best interest of you, your friends, your family, or your community. He's not interested in stopping the illegal foreclosures. He's not interested in making sure your kids can get a good education. And he is not interested in paying you a living wage. 3 weeks ago, I announced my candidacy for the Wisconsin State Assembly. And I don't want any election, especially mine, to be just about wealthy people. So I'm asking for your help. I'm asking for you and all of your friends to please send $1 to my campaign. With $1, I can continue fighting against the foreclosures that tear up our communities. With $1, I can advocate for lower college tuition. With $1, I can make sure that working families in Wisconsin making less than $50,000 a year that have kids see their taxes go down. So I'm asking you and all of your friends to please contribute. Don't make this just about the wealthy. I'm your candidate, I'm here for you, and I know you can step up to the plate. So for those of you who are wondering, that guy in the suit who offered me the money, I told him no thanks. I figured you've got this covered.
An unprecedented plan to reduce Milwaukee crime. Carol Meekins got an exclusive invitation to the first rehearsal of a group hoping the power of music can strike a chord of peace.
The late composer Leonard Bernstein once said, "This will be our reply to violence, to make music more intensely, more beautifully, more devotedly than ever before." The Black String Triage Ensemble is practicing in that same vein, hoping their strings serve as a salve for Milwaukee's troubled neighborhoods. At the group's first public rehearsal, an audience gathers at Ascension Lutheran Church on South Layton Boulevard, Sunday, April 28th.
Let's go from 31.
Founder and director Dayvin Hollman plans to deploy these musicians to selected homicide scenes in Milwaukee.
What do you hope to accomplish?
Hope to move people from absolute despair and hopelessness to hope and possibility.
Hollman believes the universal language of music can be a tool of change.
When you do music, you are always a warrior because you are always trying to communicate with the soul, whether that's your own or to reach someone else's to communicate a message. Anybody who's ever had to plan a funeral understands the importance of the favorite song of the deceased, whether that's Beethoven 5 or Led Zeppelin.
Concerts will feature music of Black composers with themes of race or poverty.
Do you believe you might be able to affect a reduction in the homicide rate and the way people think through your music?
I think if we're creative and we're diligent, anything is possible.
Plato once said, "Music gives life to everything." Hollman's dream is that harmonies will infuse a humanity in the streets and present a prelude to peace.
We're in this together, and everyone has something to contribute to this community to make a change, and this is the moment for all of us to step up.
It's beautiful. The Black String Triage Ensemble plans to start their concerts in Milwaukee's neighborhoods over the next few weeks.
As a dedicated student of history, I have personally enjoyed every single minute that we spent preparing for this discussion, because to me, you represent the true definition of a walking, talking encyclopedia, especially when it comes to the inspirational history of Black America's noble and dignified contributions to the American classical tradition. So I actually had my sister cracking up last night when I was telling her about you. I kept saying, the boy is a genius. And I really do believe that. For example, I was hoping that you would share the fascinating story you told me about the crucially critical role Coretta Scott King played in the early days of the Civil Rights Movement before Martin Luther King Jr. became an international figure, a leading international figure.
So before Coretta met Martin, she was a student at the New England Conservatory of Music there in Boston, and she was studying voice as well as violin. And so, of course, when she met the Reverend Doctor, of course, he wasn't the Reverend Doctor quite yet at the time, she basically became a pastor's wife. But her first album, I want to say 1 or 2 albums that she had, they used her voice, her singing voice, and sold those albums to start money for the movement.
That's an incredibly important chapter in the history of this country. And even at my late age in life, I had no idea, and I'm sure most of the audience had no idea that Dr. King's wife did play such a crucial role in the early stages of the movement. Now, if those of you listening and watching are enjoying this program, this life-giving work, and the story of this creative young American who's doing so much to improve life for his community and his nation, if you appreciate what his efforts, you can look on your screen, whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, and you'll see a donate button, a PayPal donate button. Now, there's no minimum donation that we're asking for. Matter of fact, I know these buttons will take $1 because when we first set it up, I called my daughter and I said, baby, daddy needs you to check this button for me. Why don't you send $5 on PayPal and let's see if the button works. And she sent $1. So, and I was just happy to find out the button worked. So
the musicians in the Black String Triage Ensemble are all volunteers, as am I, as the founder and music director. They're not for hire. They don't go to churches or synagogues or schools or civic events and play music. They are strictly dedicated to showing up in the immediate aftermath of shootings within about a 90 minute to 2 hour window, and playing concerts at the scene. And the music isn't Bach or Beethoven. It's all Black Latinx composers. So you'll hear blues, soul, jazz, reggae, funk, spirituals, gospel, all arranged according to the 5 stages of grief, from denial to acceptance, with the 6th stage of faith included at the end, because if we don't believe it's going to get better, we don't move on.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, and that's why, all the more reason why the listeners who enjoy this program should support your work, because we view violence as a public health problem, and we view what you're doing as really a form of therapeutic treatment for the community. So the price of a Big Mac could very possibly make the life and death difference in the life of someone listening to this program this evening. The price of a round of drinks, $20, that we have with our dinner, could very well be a lifetime debilitating injury and going home to your family safe and sound. So we want to encourage everyone to support this great work. The plan for the remaining month of April is to share the revenues with the between the Living Experiment in Nonviolence and the Black String Triage Ensemble for the entire month of April and perhaps beyond. We don't know what's going to happen. We know you're not doing it for the money, but we know that it takes money to make things happen, especially since you're not getting any funding at this point. Now, hopefully, some foundation will hear about this program and get in touch with you at your website. Is that the best way to reach you?
That is, yes, at the blackstringtriageensemble.org is the website. We have had some support from the Greater Milwaukee Synod of the ELCA, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. They have been gracious in being our 501c3 surrogate as we've gone through that process to get things set up. And certainly the Milwaukee Office of Violence Prevention has given us some grant funds to begin to purchase things that we need. Of course, somebody says, well, what do you need? It can be as simple as buying paper to print the music, or toner cartridge to be able to print, or clothespins to hold the music down, batteries for the music stand lights, because in many cases we are playing at night in darkness, and a street lamp isn't always enough or available.
Sure. Very practical, functional needs that could literally make a life or death difference in our community, because violence is contagious. And if you're able to treat it at the source, perhaps vibrationally, we can slow down the cycle of violence. We may not stop it, but at least it could be a factor for the good. That's certainly how I see it. So again, I want you to be encouraged, because we are part of a extended network of internet sites called the Synergized Impact Network Exchange, which is 150 interconnected networks run by socially conscious people who are trying to make a difference in the world. And I think when they hear how this works is what I'll post this on on the Living Experiments webpage. And what will happen, people in the network, they'll pick it up and they'll pass it on. Far more effectively if we tried to buy it with advertising. So you are literally speaking to the entire planet at this moment. So I just want to thank you for what you do. And not only are we asking for fiscal support, we're also asking for prayer, because we believe prayer, as the scripture says, effectual prayer worketh great good. So what we're going to do, we're finally going to close out this evening with a sequence of works from the ensemble. But there's a fascinating story that I never knew before we began to talk about the Frederick Douglass Funeral March. That's one of the numbers that will be featured in the closing sequence. Perhaps you might want to share.
So the Frederick Douglass Funeral March is a piece of music written by a man by the name of Nathaniel Clark Smith. He was a military officer, lived around the same time as Lincoln and Frederick Douglass. And he never met Frederick Douglass, but what we know about Nathaniel Clark Smith, in addition to military service, is that he also ran a number of newspapers after he got done with his military service, in addition to being a band leader, orchestra conductor. And so he certainly was, there's no record of him having met Frederick Douglass, but we know that being a military officer and Douglass having gone to Lincoln and advocating for Union colored soldiers to be paid the same as white soldiers, to which of course Lincoln said that would be problematic. Certainly Nathaniel Clark Smith had some feelings about Frederick Douglass, because Douglass was known for his oratory. And Nathaniel Clark Smith, being a printer, certainly would have been familiar with those speeches in terms of what Douglass had meant and had stood for and had advocated for. So I'm sure as a patriot, it probably must have cut Nathaniel Clark Smith quite deeply at the loss of Frederick Douglass. Now, Nathaniel Clark Smith is unusual because there isn't much about him. He is called the Melchizedek of jazz because he is the first person that we come across in American musical history that somehow trains the first generation of jazz musicians, but yet we know so little about him. We do know that Nathaniel Clark Smith was, it's said that he was only seen either in his concert dress, which was full tuxedo, or in his military dress, which, you know, in that time could be quite fantastic, just as a tuxedo could. And he was able to move freely between Black society and white society because Nathaniel provided music to various portions of the community. So he, upon the passage of Frederick Douglass, Nathaniel Clark Smith writes this piece. It was originally written for piano, but I've transcribed it note for string orchestra, which I think appropriately gives it much more of the emotional flavor that is intended.
I told y'all this boy was a genius. So we've learned so much in this time that we've spent with you. And certainly didn't mean to call you a boy. You're a great man in every sense of the word.
No offense taken. I respect my elders. Not always when I should, but in this case.
Well, I think of you as, I'm a man with 3 daughters and a grandson, and you represent to me everything I hope my grandson grows up to be. Conscious, learned person, making a positive contribution to society. There's nothing more fulfilling for a parent than to see a young person grow up and blossom and flourish.
I appreciate that. And I mean, it's hard to take in because this works for people. Like the very first crime scene that we played, a man had been shot in the leg and taken to the hospital, and the woman came out of her house. Most of the musicians had packed up. I was still there. She had curlers in her hair and her bathrobe on. And she says, I'm the mother of the person who just got shot. And she told me what had happened. She said, I will sleep better tonight knowing that you are here. And then went in the house. We played a second crime scene, and it was interesting. Intersection of 2 streets. And just to the left, about 3 houses in, was like 4 cars with the windows open, stereo blasting, and the high schools are just let out for the summer. So there's all these kids in the street twerking. And so we're setting up, and a lady just to the right of me, she had a few beverages to start her weekend. And she says, quiet, you'll wake the baby. And I just look over my shoulder and I'm like, I got 6 string players and there's 30 kids in the street twerking, and you're worried we'll wake the baby? All right, lady, all right. To make a long story short, when we got done playing at that scene, the woman was still on her porch, and she had an entirely different feeling about what we had done. She said, oh, you all really blessed me. I don't have any Sprite. I don't have any water. I wish I had something to offer you. I said, ma'am, that's not necessary. We're here for you. You know, we're not looking for Sprite. We're not looking for water. We're We're not looking for anyone to give us anything. We are there on the scene for folks in that community who have to take in that moment. Strangely enough, this has also been helpful for law enforcement. We had one sergeant that we'd seen one summer at an earlier crime scene. We showed up to another one, and he walks up to me and he says, well, first of all, I don't know what happened. I said, I don't need to know what happened. I teach kids in this community, and if it's something that's happened to one of them, that's the last thing I need to know before we play or conduct. Where do you want us to set up? And he says, well, you can set up over there in the grass. He said, you all did such an excellent job last time. It was helpful for my officers at the scene. Wow. He says, if you set up over there, he says, not only can we hear you across the street, but he said, you see over there, and he pointed up, and there were windows where people had the windows open because it was summer. They had their heads hanging out because it was hot and paying attention to what was going on outside. So he really wanted it to help permeate the environment. And then he spoiled it by warning us and saying that he might bring a dog through the grass to check for shell casings, which, you know, just not to spook the musicians, as if it doesn't matter what you play, if a dog's coming through, whether you've been told or not before, you're going to be spooked. We've had journalists, TV journalists, who, you know, because they have to come to these scenes and interview people, and then come back a week later, and then come back 4 months later, 6 months later, a year later, 2 years later. They have to carry with them the story of what happened in terms of interviewing these people who are family and friends and loved ones. And so one in particular, she had like 12 seconds, she said, before she had to go on air. And she just could not center herself to get focused to tell the story. And so she said she focused in on our music, and it helped her be able to do her job. And that's when she looked at me and said, so who are you and what is this about? So it's been helpful for a range of people who have to deal with shootings, police brutality, these things that happen. And I'll be the first one to freely admit that if you're a dad and it's your son that just got shot and we show up to a scene, what we're doing probably isn't for you so much. It's going to take a much longer arc of time for you to heal from what has happened. But for everybody else who has to live, be, and sometimes, as I say, drink in that space to interact, we shouldn't walk around with the collective thought and feeling that this is normal, that this is okay, that this has just happened, or with the sadness of, oh, this has happened again. We shouldn't become accustomed to it. There has to be something that still keeps the fire of our humanity burning.
And music filled that intersection of Holton and Center shortly after police cleared the scene this morning. Dayvin Hollman is part of the Black String Triage Ensemble. It's part of a group of Black or Latinx string musicians who play in the immediate aftermath of shootings or incidents involving police brutality. Hollman performed several songs in the River West neighborhood, trying to provide comfort to those who need it.
And I don't, like, I think I said this before, like, I don't ask questions when we get to a scene. Okay. So I plan as though it's a funeral. I plan for the worst, but everything that we do in terms of music, from denial to acceptance to faith, we hope for the best. We hope for the best. And there are other situations. We do peacekeeping missions, the Black String Triage Ensemble does, with a sister orchestra called Legion of the Soul, who are non-Black, non-Latinx musicians. And in peacekeeping situations is when the government is called a curfew, usually because of police brutality, you know, which just makes grieving people hurt more. Sure. And so we come and try to use the music to hold off violence from happening. We did this in Kenosha in the wake of the Jacob Blake shooting, and we stayed as long as we could until the tear gas became too much, and then left the scene. So we're using music really in both of those.
Tear gas.
Tear gas, yeah.
So you're playing music, and law enforcement officials see you making this effort to calm things down, but yet somewhere in their decision-making process, the most intelligent thing they could think to do was disperse tear gas against the crowd.
So I'm glad that yes, and I'm glad that you've raised this, because in the case of Kenosha, I had been elected there and then had moved to Milwaukee, but I'd still known a number of people. So I managed to get a message to the mayor of Kenosha prior to us being there that night, and basically said that the Black String Triage Ensemble would be on site, and that we would play until we felt like we were done. And that after we left, he needed a plan for peace that, quote, did not involve white men with guns. Preferably no one with guns, but particularly white men with guns. And I say that in this case because Kenosha has a history of having skinheads and neo-Nazis in that area, and Antioch, and that the National Guard had been called in, and where I love my fellow Wisconsinites, we got some white folk in the National Guard who haven't been around this. They didn't see this in high school, and I'm not so sure that's who I want keeping the peace in a situation like that. It's when people of color, when we see these situations in terms of how we are handled by law enforcement, we don't look at it as being, oh, it's just that one. We all see ourselves. We see ourselves as part of a collective, that we are attached to that as a traumatic experience. And so instead of a local government or a state government or whoever it is in terms of governance, instead of saying we're going to put out grief counselors, we're going to put out artists, we're going to make sure we have our city alderperson and our county board people out there for dialogue about issues, about how, instead of making it a community session on grief and reflection and how we can do things better, they say lock yourself in your house and do nothing. And that just bottles up all that emotion and makes people feel worse. And so the whole point was to bring music to try to hold off violence from happening. I was able to get a message to the governor's office in the case of Kenosha as well, to say the Black String Triage Ensemble would be on site. Please don't shoot at us. And to ask them, could you escort us to the scene? And the reply that came back from the governor's office was, thank you for coming out. We're real glad you're going to be there, but no, we can't do any of that for you. Thank you and good luck. And it amazes me to this day. We know exactly from 1940, 1950, 1960, 1970, 1980, 1990, 2000, 2010, 2020. We know how painful the relationship is between law enforcement and people of color, and yet the plan is always to just deploy more law enforcement. And then people get mad with, oh, there's a riot and they destroyed this and attack. Like, it's just, we have to have a smarter plan for managing and for dealing with all of that, other than just sending in law enforcement. It's not healthy or helpful for anyone.
He handcuffed me real tight. As I said, he cut my circulation off. He went out of the room and stayed, I guess, for about an hour. And he came back and tried to talk to me, asked me what could I tell him, about the robbery. I told him I couldn't tell you anything about the robbery. I don't know nothing about what you're talking about. And he said then that, oh, you're going to play tough. So you will tell us before you leave here what we want to know. So I've been known to get out of people's what I want. He got real upset and said, you will talk, you black motherfucker. You said, I'll make you talk until you in here one. So I still don't think so. He, in anger, he rushed to the typewriter and grabbed the plastic cover off there and just crammed it down over my head, and it's like he was a madman. And so a little officer helped me because I was trying to get my arms out from behind the chair, but I couldn't do anything. And I passed out. And like I said, he gave me a breath of air, and I came to conscious. You ready to talk? And I said, I don't have anything to tell you still. So he do it again. The third time, out of the third time, that's when I Told him, I said, I'll tell you whatever you want to know, man. Just don't do this no more.
And so to really force that and drive that home, peacekeeping missions are necessary. Peacekeeping missions are necessary, and necessary on an integrated front. That's why it's the Black String Triage Ensemble and Legion of the Soul, not just Triage by itself.
Great, great. It's got to come from the bottom up. Your student history, you know all the great movements in American history start at the bottom. And then the politicians had to run ahead of the crowd to try to get in front of it so they could take credit for it. But it'll be people like yourself who are forces for good that are going to bring about the final change and educate people in terms of what needs to be done. So I just want to encourage you at every opportunity and leave an open door invitation for you to come back. Consider this your home. Consider this a place where you can get your message out and teach the people. People need to know what you know. You have a wealth of knowledge that needs to be shared with the community. And I'm going to lay down right now that we need to have you back as soon as conveniently possible. We know you have a full-time job. We know you have work to do, and we're not on very often. But we want to build on this. We want this to be the beginning. We want to expand, and next time perhaps we'll go live, and that'll be interesting. So.
Yeah, so the Black String Triage Ensemble does have one open rehearsal a year. We don't do concerts, so we do an open rehearsal. Typically, our rehearsals are closed. They start in January, they go through May. The very last Sunday in May is our annual open rehearsal. This year, that will be Sunday, May 30th, 2021, in Washington, here in Milwaukee, at the Emil Blotz Temple of Music from 4 to 6 p.m. And we just basically play through everything that we're going to use throughout the duration of the summer. Because due to the weather, we're only operational June, July, and August. And that way folks can have a chance to hear and experience the music who live in places that we might otherwise not show up. I would absolutely love to come back and give a recap in September as far as what transpired over the course of the summer. Every time we go out and play, it's different. Every time we go out and play, it's different.
That would be great. Did you know that Washington Park used to be Milwaukee County Zoo?
I did. Did you know that Emil Blotz put up the Emil Blotz Temple of Music because he was inspired by the Grant Park Orchestra of Chicago and felt that Milwaukee should be able to have a place that it could come as a public park and experience, namely classical music, without really having to pay a dime.
Wow, I'm impressed. I'm always impressed. And I feel so blessed to have had this opportunity to spend this time with you. And I look forward to us talking again. And I'm very excited to see how the community is going to respond to this appeal. You have a compelling story. You have a vitally important service that fills a critically crucial need in the community. And I just want to thank you for everything that you do, and want you to keep us in our prayers as you will be in ours, and keep up the good work. God bless you.
No.
God bless America.
Yes, sir. Thank you. all arranged according to the 5 stages of grief, from denial to acceptance, with the 6th stage of faith included at the end. Because if we don't believe it's going to get better, we don't move on. I think it's going. We'll assume that's. Did I do that? I think I did that. All right. That works.
Okay. Okay. So we've been joined by Dayvin, and very happy to see him and to have him here to be able to share this moment. I'm sure everybody will get a chance to know you as the evening goes on. So waiting to hear what everybody thought. Anybody? Oh, go ahead, Sherry.
Dayvin, I'm so inspired by you because I'm a musician who has the same philosophy. I go to gas stations. Yeah, I played earlier. I watch American Idol and I think, use your gift. You don't have to be famous. Just take that tool and go find someone who needs healing. And one other thing, I'm the program director at Interfaith Conference of Greater Milwaukee. And I asked the executive director if I could serenade at the seminary because there were people during COVID that were being housed there. And the building was the old nuns building and it had this shape, like arms open wide. So this little kernel of idea turned into a 2 hours, St. Francis Seminary serenade.
Wow.
So anyway, I'm done. I just want to say I really appreciate what you're doing. I feel like you're a kindred spirit, and thank you. And it's good to be here.
Thank you. I'm reminded listening to you of the conductor Benjamin Zander, who is one of the most sought after guest conductors in the world. Because of the energy that he brings to rehearsals and refreshes orchestras and does a lot of mentoring youth. And he makes it clear. He says, you're going to play this piece, you're going to sing this piece. Now, are you going to do it, better than anyone else in history? Maybe, maybe not, but that's the point. It's really about captivating people. And he talks about shining eyes in terms of really locking in and making that connection, because it's really about people having an experience in that moment. And so you're right in with that, right in with that. So thank you.
That's great. Somehow I have a feeling that everybody in this room has been drawn together for a higher purpose. I believe we've been drawn together to serve together. And I think some great good is going to come. Seeds have been planted this evening. And I'm sure we'll all be seeing each other more and more as the future goes on. That's the prayer and the hope for sure. So I too am inspired by this young man. He did not wait for permission from society and approval from society. He saw people suffering and he had something to offer. And his work has done much great good, even to my old heart. You know, he's brought healing to my heart, giving me hope. So I just want to thank you here and now and let you know how very proud I am of you and the work that you're doing and the inspiration work that you're doing. So this is just the beginning. So there we are.
Thank you, sir. I'm hoping people have questions. I like answering questions. Doesn't mean I'll have an answer, but at least I'll have something to think about, you know.
Well, I have, if you don't mind, so playing the violin is not easy. It's like, so I'm just wondering, like, you know, when you started, and was it your first choice? And do you play other instruments?
So back in, I don't know, I think like 1990, 1989, something like that, when I was 4 or 5 years old. We'd moved to Racine from Chicago. And I was going to a Montessori school, and they gave you, they provided lessons on piano or lessons in stringed instruments. And I really, really wanted to do both. And my parents forced me to choose, which was difficult. But I chose piano at the time. And that was because as a little baby, I had seen videos of Thelonious Monk where he'd go to the piano and play with his little stubby fingers. He'd get up and clap his hands and he'd dance and he'd sit back down, you know, and play a little bit and then do it all over again. And I'm like, that looks really cool, you know. And Monk has such a deep, the reveal of his internal intimacy is so strong and so unique of a musical fingerprint. It's hard not to be enticed in some way after you've heard him and seen him. So I chose piano. And then somewhere around the age of 10, when I was in 5th grade, there was a question in the family about where the musical ability came from. And at the time, somebody who I thought was a relative, who we found out later was not, had played saxophone. And the school district had a policy, this was in Racine, that before you play saxophone, you have to play clarinet first. So they start you off on clarinet in the fall, and then they would transition you in the spring, you know, in January. So I did that. And then when I was in middle school, when I was 13, I had still, you know, all this time wanted to play strings. And so I begged and pleaded with my parents. They'd known I wanted to be an orchestra conductor since I was 4. So they finally said yes. I think it was because they were getting a divorce, and sometimes parents, they're very pliable in that moment to children. So sometimes you can request extraordinary things and they'll say yes. That's meant to be funny. It's somewhat true, but it is funny. So they said, all right, fine. You know, we'll get you a violin. So I started with that, and was at the Milwaukee Conservatory with Corinthia Klein, who now runs a shop down in Bayview repairing instruments. She's a luthier. She builds and repairs instruments. And she said, "You have really big hands. Have you ever thought about playing viola?" And I'm like, no, I don't want to play viola. No. So, you know, it took a little bit of
exploration, and I discovered the Max Bruch Romance for viola and orchestra. And so the change was made from violin to viola. Something happened with the parents in terms of taking lessons up there. And so then I got another teacher about 2-3 years later, Elaine Scroden Foreman, who's still living. She was the last protege of Yusha Heifetz, one of the last great violin virtuosos of the previous century. And she's also Louis Farrakhan's violin teacher. And she's a white Jewish woman.
Wow.
And I told her, I said, I don't want to play viola. I want to play violin. And, here's this woman who was this world-renowned, soloist and virtuoso. And she said, you started way too late. You'll never catch up. There's a ton of music. You have really big hands. Play viola. Play viola. It's easier. There's less music. It has a beautiful sound. It's like, well, okay. And I did, and I love it. And I guess I would say that really the motivation for me at 13 to really play strings was so that in the event that I might lead an orchestra, which was the life's ambition, that I wouldn't sound like an idiot on the podium. If 70 to 80% or 90% of what you have in front of you is string players, and you say something absolutely stupid in rehearsal, they will talk about you when you leave. So you had better understand the mechanics of their universe if you're going to really communicate effectively and understand what the challenges are for them and the hurdles in terms of making music. So I'll say when I'm holding the viola, I'm really a clarinet player posing as a string player, trying to do his best. I am not the greatest viola player in the world. And with work, I don't get a chance to practice all that much. But in terms of instruments, it's piano, violin, viola, clarinet, saxophone, both alto and tenor, flute, and a tiny bit of pipe organ. I say a tiny bit because I can get you through a Christmas Eve service, but beyond that, don't ask me to do anything else.
Jerry, I'm glad you asked that question. My goodness.
Well,
that's great.
The other thing I'm dying to know too is, okay, so you're musicians on call because you don't know when these incidents are going to happen, right? So do you have more people than, if you say, okay, we got to go, here's the message, grab your instruments and meet us at whatever. You probably don't. Tell me about that process.
So the musicians get they get an email from me round about March or April for the upcoming summer, listing the dates and the times that we are to be on call, because this only works because everybody agrees not to be out to dinner, not to be at the movies, not to be at grandma's house. You got to have your instrument, your music stand light ready to go. And so we actually block out time periods as an ensemble to basically be on call. Those dates are not public. The only thing that is public is when we are about to go out and respond to a scene.
When you said you were a Montessori student, Annie lit up like a Christmas tree because she is one of the leading Montessori educators in the nation. She actually has a school down in Austin. So you're speaking her language. What you said.
I was just reminded because I've been teaching really young children for almost 40 years in Montessori context, Devin, but I was just reminded that my daughter, who is your age, based on what you said about being 4 or 5 years old around that time, my youngest daughter did take violin in Montessori Elementary here in Austin, and it was a fabulous experience. I'll just make my comments now since I've been called in. It was just so wonderful, and just hearing just now about you all being on call is just so inspiring. And yes, and I mean, as far as a Montessorian by career, you know, the whole idea with Montessori is the child finding purpose. I mean, it begins with, you know, which work do you want to choose, you know, in the classroom from the time they're very tiny. And the idea is that then they will have that sense of purpose throughout life. And so it's certainly very gratifying and beautiful to hear that Montessori was a part of your life and foundation in your life. So you might like to speak about that. I was just also going to say that early on, watching this, I was really struck by something that I've felt for a long time, that that was alluded to, I think by Sherry, maybe, that, you know, music has been appropriated by those who want to become famous, you know, and, you know, and at the same time too, I think, you know, we have street musicians, you know, all over the place, here and there, you know, people play in the subways and that kind of thing. And that's very lovely. Doing something with so much purpose and so much meaning, because you're vibrationally affecting people at a time that they're traumatized. Allows that calming, and that was actually, there was a quote, you used the term hold off, you know, it helps people to hold off, and I had already written down, it helps people to respond rather than react, to give them that time to just breathe. And I was remembering, I'll just end with this, how my best friend and roommate was raped when I was in college, and I was the first on the scene. There was another friend waiting off in the distance, and then anyway, my dad came and picked us up eventually across town in Houston to take us to the hospital. And I'll never forget that Dad had classical music playing, which wasn't a usual thing in our house, but just the four of us riding in that vehicle across Houston with that classical music is something that will always stay with me. So that's a lot, but I'd love to hear anything you have to say, Devin, in response to that.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm not sure where to start first with all of that. As far as Montessori schooling goes, I want to say it was maybe for a period of about half a year to 3/4 of a year. If if the idea is that the child should find purpose, then my parents clearly did it wrong, because they should have just said, yes, you can take both. They missed the ship on that one completely. But yeah, there were a handful of occasions, sadly, in college, with friends that had experienced sexual assault, where I was the first person that they told. And yeah, I guess what I will say about just that, because I don't want to, that's significant. I don't want to gloss over that. For me, I've always wondered, said, well, why didn't you tell your girlfriends? Like, you told the Black gay man, you know. And I asked one of my friends this, and she said, well, they might judge me, and I know you won't. And so I've always wondered, in you know, the 10 years I was on the county board, for, you know, all these things about men in suits telling women when they've either never had to face, never been the first one to have to deal with the emotional complications and all the questions that come with that, about how a person not only should handle those emotions, but all those ramifications, and how different America would be if they had to stand in that place where you have to, in some ways, apologize for the gender, right? I don't, yeah, you're brilliant and courageous. Thank you for being an educator. Yeah, that's,
Well, our
and
challenge.
And I'll just say that that's exactly what I was thinking, Devin. I've been involved with something called Gender Equity and Reconciliation International for about 10 years now. And it's absolutely about that, about the genders. And they've become very expansive with that. But absolutely that you can stand in for your gender and witness, apologize, acknowledge. So absolutely, that was the first thing that came to mind when you said that about these women feeling that they wanted to share that with you. So, but thank you for your presence and your witness, your healing presence in the world. It sounds like you have it in spades with your music and your presence.
And I'll go back to what Sherry asked about us being about the musicians being on call. Is once we know, because I mean, I'm usually the first one. I'm looking at the 911 calls that come in and going to the scene to see, did somebody call in because they heard a car that backfired and they thought it was a shooting, or did something actually happen? Are there police tape where we need to actually respond to something? And when the musicians get the message, hey, there's something here, at an estimated time of arrival in terms of when we need to be prepared to play, everybody's mode of thinking is, the concern is really, what are we walking into? Not so much really to just be prepared for anything and to know that whatever it is, we have to speak to it. So, and you couldn't do that if you didn't block out time. I'm sure firefighters sit around the firehouse playing cards, lifting weights, you know. They look like that on the calendars for a reason. Yes, they do have time. But I'm sure when the bell goes off, you know, and they're running to grab equipment, the thinking has to be very, very, very different. And I think it's no different with this.
Well, our challenge over the next 8 weeks between now and June 19th is to prepare for Earth Unity Week. It's a whole week of presentations and celebration of humanity's highest expressions. And so we have the opportunity, we have a schedule of meetings on alternating Sundays and Monday nights. And our task is to put our ideas together and come up with a healing machine. We are literally caught up in a vortex of violence and destruction. Our task is to use science and spirituality together to create a healing circle of love that will be used to lift the human family and move it forward. That's our task, that's our challenge. So I'm so very grateful that we all had this opportunity to share this evening. And I'm very much looking forward to, sounds like you want to say something, Doctor.
I think he does.
Your sound's not on. You're on mute.
Mute. Oh, yes.
Okay.
Devin, you are a star, and you have been the star of this presentation. We are so grateful for what you are doing. I just don't want to miss the fact that Zachary has put this into a context that really enables us to see it, what you are accomplishing, showing the violence, showing the stories, showing hints like mindfulness for the police of other approaches to real peacemaking. But I want to recognize him too, but in a subordinate way. Thank you.
Doctor, thank you so much. That means so much coming from you. I admire you so much. I admire your work and who you are. And I believe you being here is a sign that we're doing something right. And I just want to thank you for being here and sharing with us tonight. I want to thank each and every one of you for being here. We all have vitally important roles to play. Each of us is bringing a lifetime of experience and suffering and tears to the table so that we might be a force for good in the community. And I just want to thank you so much. I'm so very grateful and humbled to be here tonight with you all.
Thank you. I'm not the star. I'm just the messenger. This could have come through someone else. Somehow I got picked.
You did.
There are many areas I come up short every single day. Trust me. I guess I didn't draw the short straw on this one, but that's got nothing to do with me. It could easily have come through somebody else. Mr. Zach, I've done a couple of these now, and none of them have been as visually compelling as what you put together. And I thank you. And that's right. The context in terms of all of this with the visual is just brilliant. And this is how people should see it and think of it. So your genius, sir, is just the muscle on that thing is bigger than anything Arnold Schwarzenegger's got.
Well, thank you so much. And it was just a matter of being in the right place at the right time. It was an easy story to tell. And I've been doing this a long time. So I think it was like everything else that's happened, the way we've all met and been drawn together. It's not us. We've got enough common sense to realize that there's something bigger than us operating in this circle. And none of us are the type of people that get carried away with ourselves. We're all humble servants of a higher good. And so we'll keep telling each other how wonderful we are from now on, because you all are a wonderful group of people. And I'm inspired by you, and hopefully I can share some inspiration with you all. That's what we're here to do, to love one another. John?
Yeah, Devin, I'd like to congratulate you on your efforts with this. And do you think this will be somewhat maybe expanded throughout the nation in the future years?
Well, it really needs to be everywhere. Look, this needed to be everywhere last week. That's the reality. And the only thing that has stopped that from happening is the fact that I have a day job. The bills have to be paid. Otherwise, I'd be, I've had requests in Chicago to show them how to do this. I mean, it's not for me to go everywhere and to lead it. No, but it's to go to Chicago, to Detroit, to Atlanta, to Baltimore, to Jacksonville, to Phoenix, to LA, and to show people, to spend a year, like pull the musicians together and to do this and to show them. And then at the end of that year, say, all right, locally, who is it that wants to take this over? Who do the musicians trust? Who feels like they might be up to the task, knowing that I'll be there to help mentor them and shepherd them as that grows in that community. My job is just to come and to show them the way to start, to plant the seed, to water it, to hand them a seedling at the end of that first year and say, this is now your baby. I'm in an advisement capacity. So yes. It's a long answer, but yes.
Yeah, all you have to do is just plant. All you have to do is just plant the seeds, and it'll grow from there.
Yeah, and and the question has come, well, can't you just explain to some violin player in city X? And it's like, well, I could, but it honestly needs to be done the way that we're doing it in Milwaukee. And that, I mean, the musicians are not for hire. They're not out here playing concerts. There is this concern about monetizing off of the suffering of people. And the purpose here is not for the orchestra to be a spectacle. It is only a spectacle because this is so unusual. That's it. That's it. But the music as the soundtrack to what's happening, to be in the background and the support, there have to be ways to safeguard and maintain that. And I really have a lot of conversations. We got 2 chaplains that work with the orchestra in terms of the members in walking through some of the thoughts and emotions that they experience in doing this, and the chaplains engage with people at the scene. But the chaplains really help keep the mission pure so that what we are doing and how we're doing it is not abused and is not misapplied. I'll even go so far as to say this. Before the pandemic, we had one fundraiser, and I made it very clear to the musicians. I said, you all can show up, but this is not a concert. In other words, we're not going to play 5 or 6 or 7 pieces of music. We're only going to have 1 or 2 of you play 1 piece of music, and you're not going to play it together. And music that you play is not going to be anything that the Black String Triage Ensemble would use. Those were the rules that I put in place. It's really to safeguard the fact so that we don't show up in the hood and have people say, well, you're just here for yourselves. No, if we wanted it for ourselves, we could go do concerts, make money. We could go collaborate with Lizzo. We could do all kinds of stuff. But we've made a deliberate decision not to do that. And the musicians are in full agreement with that. There's one who's a viola player. She's a former state patrol, former corrections, a Black woman with a badge and a gun who's just as traumatized and damaged by all of this as the rest of us are. But certainly with deeper complications with her law enforcement background as a woman of color. And she's a singer. But because we are who we are and we do what we do with the reasons that we do it, she grabs the viola and comes and plays with us. The pandemic has had her inside and sequestered, respectfully, as people have various health concerns. But that's why she does this. So there's a number of musicians in the orchestra that have said, Dayvin, the reason I'm doing this is because it's not like all the other stuff. And the character of that as this moves across the nation must be maintained. Strict adherence to those principles must be there. Otherwise it just becomes a spectacle. And then when that, God forbid that should ever happen, because that is so not the point of doing this.
Great. Well, I'm sorry.
I have 2 questions. Are we going to go off? We probably need to. I don't know if we need to go off. I had a couple of real quick questions, I think.
I got all night, whatever you want to ask.
Well, the first one is that I wrote down, came out real quickly on the video. It was said that this includes legions of the soul, so that, and I think you were maybe alluding to it right there, what the kind of spiritual grounding that you were just characterizing as absolutely essential. And I absolutely get that. I'd like to hear you say a little bit more about that. And then I just wanted to know if Devin would be open, if you were to get some kind of funding or grant, to taking this to other cities.
So Legion of the Soul, and actually, I feel bad doing this. My name is actually Dayvin. That's okay.
Dayvin?
Yeah,
No,
like
thank you. That is so important. That's so important. Thank you for correcting me.
No, I didn't want to correct anybody. I was gonna let it go, but
don't do that.
I know, but
thank you for letting me know. I appreciate
it. It is the least important thing about this conversation is my name. So,
Legion of the Soul is an interesting case. It was never in my mind to have two orchestras, but with the death of Elijah McClain in Colorado, in Milwaukee, we had a lot of people who decided that they wanted to protest that, and they were two different groups of people, both of which were not placing themselves in communities of color. Neither were led by Black or Latinx people, and were not in any proximity to a police station. One group said, well, he had autism and we feel like we need to do this. It's like, yes, he had autism, but that's not why they killed him. They killed him because he was Black. And the other group said, oh, he loved animals. We want to, and it's like, yes, but they killed him because he was Black. The component of race was entirely absent from the intent of both of these groups. They weren't even going to be playing Black composers. And so people from across the state of Wisconsin got wind of this, and everybody and their mama wanted to grab their violin and cello and come out. And I wasn't really going to say bip about it. But then folks were saying things like, well, I'm going to make t-shirts and bring t-shirts to the protest. And then the musicians inside of the Black String Triage Ensemble, when you do this, you basically become a father by default. You know, even Moody's talked about this with the pandemic and him being music director of the CSO. He says, I am the father of the Chicago Symphony. I am responsible for these musicians. And so the musicians really felt stepped on. One of our violinists said, who told the white lady to make t-shirts? Are the t-shirts coming from a Black-owned company? And where is the money going? And so there was all of this pressure I got from the musicians to say, can we do something? Can we do something? Can we do something? And I had to tell them and say, well, technically, this is a vigil. We don't do vigils because in the scenario of a vigil, we know that the person has died. And so there is no hope there. It is just simply just strict grieving people. And we all had an understanding at the start of this as the Black String Triage Ensemble that vigils are better left to churches and for communities. That is something that should be exclusively reserved for them. And so I was struggling to try to find a way to wrap, like, is there something we can do? Well, what ended up happening is I looked around my office and realized I had a bunch of spirituals and just said, you know what? Triage can sit this one out. We'll take anybody who's not in the Black String Triage Ensemble, who is sincerely committed to racial justice, that wants to do this. And I had conversations with the organizers of those two protests, and they understood the ramifications of what they were doing was harmful and hurtful, because they would get all of this media presence, and then we as Triage would go out there to respond to a scene, and they'd be like, well, you're no better than those people over there. Like, it would have come back to actually hurt us had they just done this. So what ended up happening is I put out a call and said, if you really sincerely believe in racial justice and you're not Black, not Latinx, then we're going to get together and I'm going to provide you with the music and I'll conduct and lead, and this is what we'll do. And so the number of people went from like 40 down to like 15, you know? Yeah, people really just, when that was the case, it's like a lot of people just stepped off the ship and said, nah, sorry, don't even want to deal with that. That's fine. That's fine. I want people who are serious and committed. So Legion of the Soul was formed, and we did a roving protest, 3 locations in Milwaukee, 2 songs at each location, closed with Lift Every Voice and Sing. One of those actually was outside the sheriff's department because the sheriff is a Black man with a badge and a gun who is struggling to try to lead honorably in a city that is afflicted by both gun violence and police brutality. And so I can only imagine what goes on in his brain every single night before he goes to bed, and then question at the same time what his beverage of choice is to get through that thought process. So we did this, and musicians at the end said, wow, this was so great. You know, are we gonna do this again? And I just looked at them and was like, well, I don't know. There was no plan to do this beyond what we're doing. And then the situation with Kenosha occurred, and we had a number of musicians in the Black String Trio Ensemble who weren't able to participate. And I asked the musicians, I said, is it okay to bring in Legion of the Soul? And they said, somebody said, yes, bring in the white folk. I said, okay, that's what we'll do. And so we did. And I think it is entirely appropriate that in the case of a peacekeeping mission, it should be a multiracial coalition of string players that respond. It should be spirituals. Why spirituals? Because if anyone understands anything about the history of American music, we would have none of this were it not for spirituals. Tiny alterations in pitch inside of a spiritual make the difference between jazz, blues, soul, country. It's almost like a musical source code for the identity of America. So it's very appropriate for it to be spirituals in a peacekeeping mission, which is basically an officer-involved shooting. And so I think moving forward, as this gets replicated across the country, that is something that those communities are going to have to decide. It will definitely be something I present to them as an option, because I don't want to leave anybody out. I don't want to leave anybody out. The only folks I would say that doing this is not appropriate for are kids, are minor. You know, the first year we had a 9-year-old that was part of the Black String Triage Ensemble, and she was holding it down on second violin. But then it would be like 10:30 and her mother's there and her mom's like, sorry, she has ballet tomorrow at 8 a.m. You know, and then it's like, well, we don't have anybody on second violin and we've got to close up shop for the night. You know, and it's just crime scene, situation of civil unrest is not some place that a minor should be. It's just not. But as far as a multiracial coalition of string players in peacekeeping missions, I told my board this past weekend when we had a meeting, I said, I think that is the most excellent idea out of anything that we do. And so
Have
to
children,
answer your other question.
have children in that?
Yeah, and so to answer your other question, yes, if significant funds were provided so that I could go and do this elsewhere, absolutely. I've had requests from pastors that have said you can use my church as a rehearsal space. I've got string players and musicians across the country that are eagerly awaiting to do this, and it's just a matter of me basically not being in a school, which I love the kids. It's fantastic. It's healing work, but I understand. I said this to one of the teachers today. Every time those children leave the building and go home, they are concerned that a stray bullet is going to come through the window and kill them. And they are also concerned about possibly having to see a building lit on fire, because we don't know how to handle this whole officer-involved shooting thing. We don't have a plan. We don't know how to wrap our minds around how to handle the fallout of that. And so it really doesn't matter what you do in the classroom, because the minute that kid walks out the door, it's going to be nullified by everything else. And the faculty in the school that I work at have, I think, figured that out and have said, you're great with the kids. We see you helping them tie shoes. We see you helping them read. We see you helping them do math. We see you helping them resolve conflict and deal with emotional difficulties. But we really need you doing this. My principal, my faculty, my staff, the building engineers, the lunch staff, I love every single one of them. And I think they have come to that conclusion just as much as I have. So if funds were provided via donation to make that possible, absolutely. And both of our chaplains, our lead chaplain, Reverend Ronald Ballou, Associate Chaplain, Reverend Molly DeReza, have both said as much. They know that this needs to be everywhere.
That's one of the reasons we're doing a fundraiser, is because that's what he needs to be doing. That's what he really needs to be doing. That's what this nation needs this to happen. This is a nation that has lost its mind. There are mass shootings every day, and we can't keep doing the same thing we've been doing all these years, all these many years. And science tells us we do have options. There are options. And one of the things, the first things that we have to do is free up this ball of talent and channel it in a place where it can do the most good. He does great good at the school, working with the kids, but the nation needs him to share his gift on a wider scale. And that's one of the underlying motivations of this fundraiser. We'll be beating the bushes. In fact, you mentioned Sheriff Lucas. His office called us today and granted an interview. So we will be building on this discussion and coming up with ways, hopefully, to use music. Why should we wait till there's a homicide to start using music as a form of therapy? Why can't we use it proactively to help people make better, healthier choices in their life? We're researchers. We're experimenting. We don't know what's going to work. We're not afraid to fail. We're not afraid to try things. So I'm very excited with where we are. And it is starting to get late. It's almost 9 o'clock. So there are some of us that, some of you all have to go to work in the morning. And we do meet once a week on alternating Sundays and Mondays. I send out the schedule so we can build on this. We can definitely build on this. I'm available during the week. I'm retired, so y'all can reach me anytime. Anytime you want to talk. This is what I do. This is what I love to do. And we can definitely build on this and we can go from here. So does anybody want to close us out with a prayer? Sherry, do you have another number you could do?
Well, since David missed that, here we go. It's a good prayer to come in with, and I think it's probably just as well to go out with it, if that's okay.
Absolutely. It was beautiful.
What tradition is it from, Sherry?
It's Sanskrit. It's a Hindu prayer.
The Hindu. Okay.
Yeah. So it's a prayer of peace and harmony.
God bless each and every one of you, and God bless America. You all have a good night. The next meeting is on Sunday. Y'all take care.
Thank you, Zachary. Thank you, Dayvin.
Thanks, Zachary. Nice to meet you.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night.
Night.
Good night.